I struggle with Robert Silverberg, and I certainly struggled with the latest audiobook of his that I listened to, A Time of Changes, narrated by Tom Parker. I felt the narration was okay, it was pretty good. It felt a little bit dated. I don't think the voices were done perhaps as well as they could have been, but those are all very minor complaints or concerns. Overall, it was a good listen. I think my problem with A Time of Changes is simply that for me, it's not a very good book. And I feel a little bit nervous saying that because I know that a lot of people regard Robert Silverberg very highly. And this novel did win the 1971 Nebula Award. So obviously, there must have been quite a few people who did like it at the time. So, having got all the way through it after almost DNFing it about one third of the way in, I wonder to myself, and to you obviously, why I did not resonate with the book as much as I feel I should have done. And I have come to the following conclusions. Silverberg chose to write the novel in the form of an autobiography of the principal character, a guy called Kinnell, who's on this particular planet. And because of that, I think he robs the narrative of a lot of tension, and he also imposes upon the narrative a lot of exposition and a lot of telling. And if you've even thought about writing for more than a few minutes or looked at a few YouTube videos on the basics of how to write fiction, you will know that info dumping, exposition, and telling rather than showing are in general considered no-nos in the trade. And Silverberg does a lot of info dumping in this novel, and he does a lot of telling, and he doesn't do much showing. And I think that was part of the problem that I had that almost had me DNFing the novel in that first third. So the autobiographical form requires, I think, that there be a lot of telling and kind of exposition that comes with that as well. Is because you're having someone explaining to you what happened in the past in their own words. You're not having a third person view of this. And this person is having to explain not only his history, but the history of the planet he's on, or at least Silverberg is doing that through this person. This is a planet that's been colonized by humans sometime in the long distance past and has since gone on its own historical trajectory. And they created something called the Covenant on this planet, which is a social construct where you don't refer to self, you don't refer to I or me. Uh, and if you do, this is called self-bearing, and it's frowned upon deeply. Well, more than frowned upon, it's essentially illegal. And while I think that's a nice idea, he doesn't demonstrate how important it is to the culture. In fact, the novel starts with our character at the end. And so he's already gone through his transition to be able to refer to himself as I and me rather than one or not at all, just by his name. And so we don't see in the beginning his struggle with that. I mean, he tells us about his struggle with it, but we don't see his struggle with it. We're not shown his struggle with it. So that is a big problem with that whole premise of the no I and no me. And I think that's the no I and no me in the culture is also a fairly weak plot trope. And it's not just used in science fiction. It, unless you demonstrate how important it is to the people and the culture that carries out this particular type of social interaction. And he never demonstrates that. Not until the very, very, very end does he demonstrate how important it is. And I think that was a missed opportunity. Certainly, if I had been writing this novel, I and I'd been lumped with this no I and no me, no self-bearing, I would have wanted to demonstrate how important that is and how dangerous it is if you do it. So you'd have had a scene, I would have had a scene where our hero, Kinnell, watches somebody else doing it, and then we see the consequences. They get put in prison, they get executed, whatever it is that happens. And so we and our hero would know exactly how dangerous it is to do it in this culture, but we don't see that. In fact, all the way through, it's kind of it's a bit like a politeness thing. You, saying I is like, oh, it's offensive. It's like saying, the F word or the C word, if you say it in polite company to people you don't really know, they'd be like, well, hang on, hold on, what's he saying? It's like that. Never feels worse than that. And to make that particular part of the story even worse is that working class or marginalized populations are not particularly offended by I or me. There's a scene with a whore in the book, and he uses I and me with her, and she is used to such rough language. And again, that demolishes or diminishes, I should say, the importance of this I and me. If it's only really, the middle upper classes, so to speak, in this culture that really worry about it, then big deal. So that's a problem. The other problem is, I think that given that you have this culture where self-bearing is a problem, you don't let your inner thoughts out, you don't show everything and you don't put it out on the table, and it's been written by somebody from this culture, they come across as a little bit cold. And I didn't, Kinnell, for me, I didn't really resonate with him. First of all, I didn't think his problems were that significant. And also, he's unfortunately, I think for him and for the story, he was this privileged son of a prince. And so he's this, like, well to do, well positioned important person who is the younger brother of someone who becomes the ruler of this particular country on this planet. And he feels because of that he has to leave. And then there's an interesting sequence where he gets marginalized. He goes to a different country on this planet. He gets marginalized and he becomes a worker. He has to rough it with the working classes, and that gets interesting. And I start to have a little bit of sympathy with him because, yeah, right, he's joined the real world. And when he does, you realize this I and me thing, it's like more of an upper middle class problem and not really working class one. And so that again, it's like, so what's all this problem with I and me? She's like, just stay with the working classes. They're a nice bunch of people. Don't bother with the rest of those middle class brats. So that diminished the novel. And so this reminds me of another point, because there's no tension in the first third of the novel. I'm not concerned for this character Kinnell. He's not in danger as far as I can see. He keeps saying, "Oh, I'm saying I and me, and it's all terrible, and they're coming after me," because he's the beginning of the novel. It's at the end, and he's hiding in the desert somewhere in one of these countries, Manorim, I think, and he's all like, "Oh, the end is nigh," and I'm sitting there thinking, "Yeah, why?" So you said I, said me. Oh, big deal. And that is reinforced as the novel goes on for the first half. It's like you're sitting there thinking, boy, oh boy, this place is well screwed up in not a particularly interesting way. And it's worse because there's no tension. Like I said, there's no scene where, Kinnell is confronted by someone else who's said I and me, and he's dragged away by the police and he's beaten up and then he's executed. And it's like, holy shit, if you say I and me, you are in deep trouble. We never see that. And also in his interactions with other people, there's not really much tension. It's like, my brother, my big brother, he becomes the septarch of this country, and I'm going to be like, I should get out of there because he'll look to me as a possible usurper. Now, if there had been some tension where he's like, maybe I should usurp or shouldn't, or maybe the guards had come or the secret police had come and like were hunting him down because is he a threat? Isn't he a threat? To his brother. And he'd had to escape quickly and get out of there, and he was being chased. That would have made it interesting because there'd be some freaking tension. You'd be going like, "Oh, I've got to read the next." But in fact, what Silverberg does, and he does it well. I won't say he doesn't. He describes this planet, this world, this culture in detail, and it's an interesting culture and it's an interesting world, but that on its own doesn't work. I mean, there's got to be some tension. You've got to do some showing that kind of sets, problems up, and makes you want to read the next page, because what the heck's going to happen to this person, and engages you with them. And Silverberg doesn't do that. He just doesn't do that. And I'm like, you know, what were these guys on in the 70s? What were they, I think it was, I think there was a lot of literary pretension in those days. It's like, oh, I don't want car chases or spaceship chases or, zap gun battles, because that's pulp. And so I want to make my writing literature. And there was a whole bunch of people who did that. I think Brian Aldiss has some novels where you can point the finger at him for doing that. And I think Edmund Cooper as well. I think Barry Malzberg is a particularly bad offender of trying to write art as a story, and generating total rubbish, in my opinion. Anyway, I think Silverberg suffers from that problem because clearly he can write, but for some unknown reason decided not to write something that was interesting. I'm so halfway through, I got through the DNF bit. I was like, I have to finish this damn thing. It's supposed to be a classic. And for the second half of the novel, I felt engaged, or more engaged. First of all, because we had this section where Kinnell was in roughing it there with the working classes, and I thought, oh yeah, this is interesting. We're seeing, these are the people I'm more interested in. These royalty is essentially what they were. Is like that, like all rich people everywhere, and so interesting, but not really. Thank you. But when you get down to the people who make the culture, make the whole place work, then it got more interesting. Unfortunately, Kinnell then gets taken up by a friend of one of his, and he again gains a position of power, which the plot kind of requires him to do so. And when you see what it is that he's doing once he gets this position of power, you're kind of a bit like, yeah, I kind of see why Silverberg had to, once he'd brought him down to this working class Joe, he had to build him back up into a man of power, into a position of power. And the reason is because Kinnell meets an Earthman who doesn't have this problem of I and me. He's like you and me. He's quite happy to self-bear, if you like. And he also knows of a drug that allows you to mind meld or have a telepathic interaction, or be very, very familiar with somebody else taking the drug at the same time. So you can kind of know their thoughts. And of course, this is antithetical to this covenant and to this non-self-bearing, no I, no me. And I suppose Silverberg was trying to generate tension by having this drug, because it's, the direct opposite of what you're supposed to do in this culture. And so Kinnell self-bears, and, he realizes that, this sense of fellowship that you get from knowing someone really well, really intimately, is really nice. Well, he kind of knew it before, but the drug reinforces that. And so he then becomes a proselytizer of this drug. And that position of power allows him to give it to very powerful people. And I won't say anything more about the plot from here on out, so that I don't discourage you from going to read the novel yourself and coming to your own opinion about it. The second half of the novel I thought was better, but again, the ending is devoid of any tension, really, because it's kind of been telegraphed at the beginning what's going to happen at the end. And so, all in all, I would say that this hasn't strengthened my opinion of Silverberg. I've tried to read a number of his other novels and had equal difficulty with them. And this one doesn't convince me that he's a novelist that I like. But I will not give up on him, because he's so influential in the past and people still respect his writing. that I think I've got to take him seriously, even if I don't personally like what he does or the way he writes. Okay, I'm sorry I had to be negative, and if you like the novel, please, you can lambast me all you like in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong. And maybe I'll get to understand, and maybe if I actually physically read the book as a book rather than listen to it as an audiobook, I might appreciate it more. Who knows?